Every great story needs a great opening that not only establishes the core conflict, characters, and themes of a narrative, but also foreshadows future events. That's a long list of things to get done when you only have a few pages or minutes of screen time, but when you pull it off, then it does wonders for hooking an audience. I recently rewatched Netflix's Daredevil and was reminded very quickly why the show is so brilliant, and how far it could fall. Yes, it has cool fight scenes and court drama and great acting, but at its core, as always with these things, what truly makes the show so captivating is its writing. I was especially struck by its killer first episode that showed us from the get-go how you properly introduce every item on the list I talked about above in efficient and interesting ways. Although I could prattle on and on about that entire first episode, for this video I want to deep dive into just the opening sequence and talk about the writing and directing behind the 3 scenes that kick off this dark superhero drama. This video will be completely spoiler free for the rest of the show, and I will try my hardest to preserve the original content without twisting too much of it for the copyright bots. We shall see how that goes, I guess. Before we begin, I would like to quickly shout out the writers and creators behind Daredevil and this particular first episode. The show was created by Buffy and Angel alumni Drew Goddard, with Stephen S. DeKnight as showrunner for Season 1. This first episode was written by Goddard himself and directed by Phil Abraham, who did work on The Sopranos and Mad Men prior to working on Daredevil. So, with that housekeeping and those introductions out of the way, I'm John from The Author's Anvil, and this is how you write a perfect opening sequence. Enjoy! Daredevil opens with the sound of sirens, followed by a hard cut to a worried man walking down the road. Already we are given a sense of danger and discomfort. The man hurries through a disastrous traffic incident to his son, who is hurt and confused. The boy asks what is happening, and Abraham gives us some perspective shots of hazardous waste materials and another victim nearby, an old man. We're then told that the boy saved this old man's life. The boy's eyes start to burn and the father comforts him. We get several more cries from the boy until we get a perspective shot of him losing his sight, bringing this first scene to a close. All of that amounted to roughly 1.5 minutes of screen time, and boy do we already have a lot to talk about. I want to first talk about how little dialogue we have, and yet how much we learn about these two characters from just the action. The boy, who we have yet to learn his name, is already characterized as being self-sacrificing and willing to help those in need. This person is most certainly going to be our hero for the story. You might have thought that the main character was going to be the father, but director Phil Abraham uses the camera to subtly indicate otherwise. Despite our first shots resting on the father and then following him for most of the scene, this is actually to show us what a passive character he is. The father did not see the incident happen, and then spends the rest of the scene consoling his son. He does not go to help anyone else despite walking past several other victims, and then when he does reach his son, there is nothing he can do. I'd like to make clear that I'm not criticising this character for his actions. Him not stopping to help other people is completely understandable in the situation of being terrified for his child. I am just pointing out that he's a passive character in contrast to his son, who has just saved someone else's life at great personal cost. I think it's interesting how the scene plays out on a bright sunny day in a normal looking street. Usually dark or traumatic events in TV take place at night or are filmed in striking locations. However, here we have quite the opposite, and it makes the opening all the more tragic for our hero. It is clear that this event was completely unexpected, and it would have been a complete shock to have this happen while on a regular street. The blue sky also makes it even more damning when we get that perspective shot of him going blind. The enveloping darkness is made that much more frightening when it's contrasted against such a bright and saturated colour. The fact that we are shown this tragic thing happen to an innocent child already sets the tone of this show. This is going to be a dark, gritty, and brutal story. Before we move on to the next scene, I just want to highlight how it's only the father present here to be with his son, implying that the mother is absent from the boy's life, something that will become very relevant in the rest of the show.
Bless me, Father, for I have sinned.
The audience is introduced to this dialogue in a black screen. For a few moments, we share the blind experience of our main character before fading into a shot of a dimly lit room showing a pair of red-tinted glasses. This opening shot already tells us a lot about the vibe of the man speaking, who we can obviously determine is the boy from the first scene grown up. For the ease of this video, I will now just refer to him by his real name Matt, even though the audience doesn't know it yet. Anyway, Matt is presented to us as being in a dark place, a confession box in fact. We immediately know that he is religious then, specifically Catholic given the sacrament he's performing, and that he is in conflict with that spirituality.
It's been too long since my last confession.
I want to quickly go back to his glasses though. I don't think they're tinted red just because it looks edgy and cool, but because they again foreshadow a lot about Matt's character. Not only with the obvious reference to the colour of the devil, but red is commonly used as a colour for anger, something which Matt struggles with throughout the show. And I love this second shot too. Matt is in the foreground as he's our main character, and he's literally separated from the other person he's talking to. Not only does this confession box tell us that he's Catholic, but it also hints at another conflict in Matt's character, his loneliness and reflex to separate himself from other people. Matt then goes on to talk about his dad, and how he was a boxer, and although not a successful one, he could take a punch.
24-31 record before you.
I'd like to note Chris Cox's brilliant acting here. The pride in his voice, the swallows he implies that his dad is no longer with us, the distant look in his eyes that not only conveys blindness but also a wistfulness about his childhood. In just a few lines, we completely understand Matt and his father's relationship. This next exchange is also wonderfully efficient.
Jesus, he could take a punch.
Language?
Sorry, Father.
Matt blaspheming there was just another indication that he is undergoing a spiritual conflict. Plus, we get some character from the priest. We get the impression that these two know each other very well. Matt goes on to talk about how although his father lost a lot of bouts and would get knocked down, he'd always get back up. The man never got knocked out. Again, a lot of pride here in Matt's voice, and without going into too many spoilers, we see how this sentiment about his father gives him a lot of strength when he's fighting as Daredevil. Our next emotional beat, however, comes from a shot where Matt is in the background but in focus, creating an uneasiness. What Matt is about to say next is something that perhaps he's not so proud of his father for. Apparently, Matt's grandmother was concerned about the Murdoch boys because they've got the devil in them. This is probably the most on-the-nose foreshadowing we get in this scene considering the TV show is called Daredevil, but I think the writers have earned it given how they've packaged it within such a fantastic monologue. Matt goes on to agree with his grandmother by recalling how his father would sometimes get violent in the ring, that he'd just let the devil out. I find it interesting that we see Matt's eyes tearing up here. I don't think it's just him getting emotional talking about his father, but I think it's also him realising that he has had the devil pass on to him. He now bears this cross, pardon the pun. The priest realises this and tries to subtly draw out a confession from him.
Perhaps this will be easier if you tell me what you've done.
And here we get our first subtle hero shot. Matt puts on his devil-coloured sunglasses to indicate that not only is this conversation coming to an end, but he's also putting even more distance between himself and the priest. The eyes, after all, are the window to the soul.
I'm not seeking penance for what I've done, Father. I'm asking forgiveness for what I'm about to do.
Another little nugget of character here. Matt is someone who's confident in his convictions. We understand now that he's here at the confession box as almost a formality at this point, but there must be a tiny flicker of doubt within him, otherwise he wouldn't have come. We get a lingering shot on Matt who stays silent. He's not ready or willing to tell the father what he's about to do, implying that it's probably going to be something sinful. We begin to hear the sound of a woman crying out, and then cut to a new scene. I'm not actually going to talk about this third scene too much. It's honestly a pretty bog-standard fight scene where Matt, as a masked vigilante, violently takes down a trafficking gang at some docks. The two main things to note here are of course what a complete badass he is despite being blind, and we do indeed see the devil come out. Although Matt doesn't kill any of the traffickers, he is incredibly brutal and merciless towards them, to the point that he frightens the people who he's just saved. Our last shot of the opening is us staring the devil in the face, Matt punching the camera into submission before cutting to the opening credits. Yes, I just rambled for like 8 minutes about an opening scene. Hello, I'm a writer. But I really hope I've just demonstrated how brilliantly these 3 scenes introduce us to the show. In roughly 7 minutes, the writer and director have given us a fully fleshed out character and a perfect snapshot into what Daredevil is going to involve. When you're able to show multiple things at once with just a few words of dialogue or a particular shot, then you know you've done good. We understand Matt's tragic history, the moral principles and conflicts present in his life, 2 relationships that have and will define him, and then see his capabilities as a vigilante in a violent climax. There was not a single word of dialogue in that confession scene that was wasted. Every line delivered by Charlie Cox told us something new about Matt Murdock, and even though it was just 2 shots in a confession box, every second was compelling to keep us watching. By the time the credits roll, we know that this is going to be a dark, gritty crime drama about a man struggling with the morality of using violence to fight evil. These opening scenes get the audience to ask questions, and when you establish interesting questions, then you've got the viewer hooked. How will Matt reconcile his vigilantism with his Catholic beliefs? How far is this man willing to go to stop crime? Will he be able to control the devil within him, or will the devil control him? Oh yeah, and how can a blind man fight like Batman and still live? I cannot stress how impressive it is to achieve all of this within such a short span of time. Many other TV shows can spend a whole season trying to establish a strong main character and theme, and still fail horrendously. There is much to learn from this first 7 minutes and from the rest of the show that maintains excellent quality throughout. I would thus highly recommend you go watch Daredevil, but if you want some more context into the comic book character before going in, then why not check out my first video on him. This video's been a little shorter than usual, and that's simply because I've still been settling into my new home in Canada, and honestly the previous video took a lot out of me. Really hope you enjoyed this one. For any fans of The Man Without Fear, what are your favourite scenes from the show? Or got any other films or TV shows that you want me to deep dive into? Let me know in the comments. For now, hope you have a great day, thanks again for watching, keep an eye out for any future videos, and remember to keep writing.